Hello, my name is Dr. Mark Joseph O'Connell. Welcome to my research, The Future Will Be Worn Out, Intelligent Matter and Future Fashion Systems. Fashion has always been a technology of the future. Long before Silicon Valley discovered the language of the interface, fashion communicated that the body was never simply biological. A garment is a threshold between self and public, and fantasy and memory. The history of fashion, then, is not only a history of style, it is a history of materials communicating. The forthcoming decades of fashion will not be defined only by new silhouettes, color stories, or the predictable styles being rehashed of previous decades. The most significant transformation is happening at the level of matter itself: color, material, and finish. What the design industries call CMF are moving from static attributes to remarkably adaptive behaviors. The future surface will not simply drape, reflect, or decorate. It will sense, respond, store information, alter its chromatic state, regulate heat, biodegrade, signal provenance, and perhaps even participate in environmental repair. In that sense, the future of fashion is not only wearable technology, it is a wearable ecology. Leading fashion forecasters identify a broader cross-industry movement from passive surfaces towards intelligent, responsive, and regenerative systems. In my view, however, the most important point is not the novelty of all this. It is the end of material passivity. The garment of the near future will not sit quietly on the body as an ornamental commodity. It will become an interface between biological, social, climatic, and data systems. This is not a small technical adjustment. It tasks fashion with reconsidering its deepest cultural antecedents. The modern fashion system has largely been built on acceleration. More seasons, faster drops, extraction, synthetic novelty, logistics, and inevitably, more returns and more waste ending up in landfills. Sustainability has tried, often heroically, but too often inadequately, to slow down that machine. Yet slowing down the pace alone is no longer enough. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development projects that global material use could more than double from 79 gigatons in 2011 to 167 gigatons by 2060. Meanwhile, the circular economy's promise remains sadly under-realized. Circle Economy reports that the share of secondary materials consumed by the global economy has declined in recent years, reaching only 6.9% in its 2025 assessment. Recycling by itself is not saving us from the appetites of the system, or even our own appetites. So, the question becomes more radical. What if the garment were designed not as an object to be consumed, but as a living participant in a material ecology? This question takes us beyond the exhausted opposition between natural and synthetic, craft and technology, even luxury and sustainability. It moves us into a more complex field in which biotech, structural color, 4D printing, regenerative design, responsive textiles, and digital product passports, as well as artificial intelligence, all become part of the same fashion design conversation. That conversation is not simply about making fashion less harmful and toxic. It is about making fashion function differently. Let me move through some key areas. First of all, let's talk sensory connection. Although inanimate, fashion has always been intimate because it touches us before anything else does. It is undeniably a powerful social interface. Otherwise, we would all be walking around naked. Cloth is the first architecture of the body. It mediates warmth, modesty, eroticism, comfort, and social recognition. But the sensory language of fashion has often been reduced to softness, stretch, weight, and luxury hand feel. The next stage is far more complicated. Materials that do not merely touch the body, but register it. Fashion futurists describe a future in which materials become emotionally intelligent systems, responsive to touch, movement, breath, and mood. For fashion, this opens a field beyond the hard, device-centered history of wearable technology. The next wave must be softer, more textile native, and more emotionally literate in order to inspire widespread adoption. The question is not whether a garment can collect biometric data. The better question is whether it can translate bodily signals into forms of care, comfort, attention, and self-knowledge without turning the wearer into a precarious and surveilled object. The intelligent surface is never neutral. It decides what counts as signal, who receives it, and how the body is interpreted. A textile that records temperature, heart rate, or motion can become a tool of mindfulness. But it can also become a mechanism of control if the data belongs to employers, insurers, platforms, or brands rather than the wearers themselves. Fashion futures must therefore treat sensory materials as socio-politically volatile. Now we go on to color. It is one of fashion's oldest and most enduring seductions. It is also one of its most complicated material economies. Purple once belonged to empire and mollusks. Cochineal for scarlet was a major driver of colonization of Latin America. Indigo was conjoined to colonial plantations and labor. Synthetic dyes like movine were a direct result of connections to industrial chemistry, as was the arsenic green, which was certainly a compelling color, but highly toxic to the workers that had to manufacture it. More recently, fluorescent colors are connected to petroleum and spectacle. Coatings and complex composites are connected to metallic finishes and to mining. The list goes on. Color has never been merely visual. It is historical, colonial, ecological, and highly emotional. The coming shift is from color as applied surface to color as active agent of communication. Responsive pigments, bioinks, and structural color systems may allow garments to express changes in temperature, light, emotion, or environmental condition. If you think about color, it is one of the fastest ways fashion produces desire, quickly followed by obsolescence. A seasonal shade can make last year's garment feel socially dead, even while shapes and styles can span over several seasons. If fashion is to escape this nihilistic chromatic churn, color must be redesigned as durability, adaptability, and carry meanings larger than an indicator of simple novelty. The more radical development is structural and biological color. Structural color produces visual effects through microscopic architectures rather than conventional pigment chemistry. In nature, this is the brilliance of beetle shells, butterfly wings, and peacock feathers. In design, it offers the possibility of shimmer without metallic particles, mined minerals, or microplastic glitter. This tasks fashion with treating fashion as color as something extracted from elsewhere and start treating it as a relationship between light, structure, and perception. Could the future precious object be the one that avoids abstraction? The next innovation is programmable form. Fashion has always shaped bodies, but it is usually done so through fixed forms: seams, darts, pleats, padding, tailoring, stretch, and compression. Programmable materials disturb that sequence and structure. They point to garments that could potentially continue to form after production, adapting to movement, heat, impact, moisture, or even time. A trajectory of materials moving from 3D to 4D, exhibiting behavioral intelligence through adaptive polymers, shape memory alloys, self-healing systems, and additive manufacturing are on the horizon. For fashion, this is not merely about uncomfortable 3D printed spectacles of the past. It opens up the possibility of a post-size future. Standard sizing is one of fashion's most ordinary cruelties. It asks diverse bodies to conform to industrial averages and then sells the resulting discomfort as personal failure. My colleague, Philip Sparks at Seneca Polytechnic, has done some really fascinating research in this area. Programmable and additive manufacturing could help garments adapt to bodies rather than bodies having to adapt to their garments. But we should be cautious. Additive manufacturing is not automatically sustainable. A 4D garment that changes shape but enters landfill as an unreadable hybrid textile is simply a more theatrical object of waste. The value of programmable fashion will depend on whether it reduces material throughput, whether it extends use, and enables repair and supports circular design systems. Then we have second skins. Now, the term second skin is heavily overused in fashion already, usually to describe tightness, seamlessness, or sensual proximity. However, the next generation of symbiotic materials gives the phrase new force. A second skin may become breathable, sensing, antibacterial, biodegradable, healing, energy harvesting, or bioactive. Fashion that moves closer to medicine, wellness, cosmetics, and prosthetics. Here the stakes are high. Symbiotic fashion could help produce more generous relationships with the body, garments that support elder care, disability design, burn recovery, occupational safety, or even climate protection. Conversely, though, it could also deepen fashion's exploitation of bodily insecurity, turning every pore, sweat trace, wrinkle, or stress signal into a commercial opportunity that needed to be covered. The ethical difference lies in whether these materials are designed for comfort, agency, and care, or for surveillance with the goal of offering corrections. Then there is the garment that is designed to disappear. Fashion is notoriously bad at endings. It knows how to launch, seduce, then discount, dump, and replace. Cares far less about how products should end. Fashion and architecture have always borrowed from one another. Architecture gives fashion its structure, volume, and monumentality, while fashion gives architecture softness, movement, and ornament. But in the coming decades, their relationship may become more material than metaphorical. Things like mycelium panels, hemp composites, algae surfaces, 3D printed earth, and living coatings are not only architectural innovations, they are part of the same regenerative material that fashion must incorporate into its toolkit. Similarly, pollution as value invites fashion to work with smog, soot, contaminated soil, wastewater residue, and industrial byproducts as raw materials for pigments, glazes, and composites. Used carefully, pollution-derived color can become a form of material testimony. It says, here is the residue. But this is also dangerous because making beauty from contamination does not absolve the systems that are producing the contamination in the first place. The task is not to romanticize pollution, but to expose it and hopefully redirect it. Then there is the dump. A regenerative future must design the death of the garment as carefully as its birth. The term biodegradable is one of the most abused words in sustainable design. Materials biodegrade under specific conditions, not through wishful language. Landfill, incineration, export, downcycling, and wardrobe accumulation have become the shadow archive of modern fashion overconsumption. This is why traceability and regulations are important. The European Union's textile strategy includes design requirements for durability, repairability, and recyclability, digital product passports, action on microplastic release, and extended producer responsibility. A digital product passport could become an invaluable tool telling future users what a garment is made of and how it should be cared for. A passport is only useful if the material system behind it is legible and actionable, though. Otherwise, it's just a QR code performing accountability. At this point, we need to bring in some posthuman theory. Rosi Braidotti's posthumanism is useful for fashion because it refuses the fantasy that the human body is the stable center of all design. Fashion has staged the human as its privileged subject. The dressed body, the desiring consumer, the styled self, the sovereign wearer. But posthumanism asks us to recognize that bodies are always entangled with animals, plants, bacteria, machines, atmospheres, minerals, infrastructures, and waste. Braidotti's concept of zoa is central here, where bios traditionally names the politically recognized life of the human subject. Zoa refers to, and this is Z-O-E, refers to non-human generative life, animals, plants, bacteria, cells, and the dynamic vitality of matter itself. This shift is not decorative theory. It asks fashion to stop treating non-human life solely as raw material. Leather is not just a hide to go onto a bag. Silk is not just a luxury protein fiber to go on a scarf. The ethical question is not simply, is biofabricated leather better than animal leather? The deeper posthuman question is, what relations does this material produce? What does it demand from microbes, energy grids, and feedstocks? What forms of life does it spare? And what new forms of extraction does it require? Then we have the idea of care. Anneke Smelik's Posthuman Ethics of Care for Fashion was just published in Fashion Theory and offers a really interesting corrective to any fashion futures discourse that becomes too dazzled by its own novelty. Her argument begins with the apparently banal object of a basic cotton t-shirt. But she notes that it carries earth, water, air, sun, agricultural labor, as well as industrial processing, dye chemistry, logistics, washing, wearing, affect, and eventually, you guessed it, waste. The garment is not an inert commodity. It is a material assemblage, a knot of human and non-human relations. Smelik's ethics of care applies to much of the coming decade's design language, as it will revolve around smart matter, be it adaptive textiles, living pigments, or bio-integrated membranes. So the question is not simply how to make materials more responsive. It is how to become more responsible to the materials we already wear. That care must be habitual. Smelik, drawing on Carolyn Pedwell, uses the idea of revolutionary returns, everyday practices that change the system because they change repetition itself. Washing garments less, repairing them more, and buying differently. These are counter-infrastructures. Now let's turn to the elephant in the room. Artificial intelligence. The most likely future of AI in fashion is not a single dramatic rupture, but a quiet infiltration of the entire value chain. AI will forecast demand, generate content, personalize shopping, support resale, power the digital product passports that I mentioned earlier, and accelerate materials research and manage supply chains. McKinsey estimates that generative AI could add between 150 billion and 275 billion to the operating profits of the apparel, fashion, and luxury sectors within 3 to 5 years. But the more important point is not the size of the prize. It is the breadth of the transformation. AI will be used wherever fashion currently wastes, be it time, money, labor, attention, or material. This makes it very promising, also potentially dangerous. AI could certainly reduce overproduction, improve fit, support made-to-order models, reduce sampling, and map supply chain risk. However, it could also generate endless product variations, accelerate microtrends, and flood consumers with algorithmically optimized desire. The question is not whether fashion should use AI. It already does. It is here, folks. The question is whether AI will be used to produce sufficiency or fuel more waste and discard. The current AI boom also brings its own material infrastructure. Milmo and Down report that AI infrastructure spending, including data centers and chips, could raise from $765 billion in 2026 to $1.6 trillion by 2031. They also note that data centers and AI-related investment now carry a disproportionate share of economic growth. In this situation, the cloud is not some vaporous entity. It is a voracious hub that requires land, concrete materials like steel, copper, water, as well as electricity and heat. If fashion claims that AI makes design more sustainable, it must also account for the infrastructure that makes that AI possible. On a side note, though, AI also has some implications for education. Emerging research on student AI use suggests that heavy reliance can produce what has been called cognitive debt. Weaker recall, weaker conceptual ownership, and weaker critical confidence, as well as a diminished ability to begin without machine assistance. In fashion education, this matters hugely because studio learning depends on friction, drawing poorly before drawing better, cutting things badly and sewing them horribly. Believe me, I was a fashion student. You have to go through the process to get better, right? It's like learning anything. AI that should therefore be taught as a thinking partner and not a thinking substitute. They need to learn not just how to prompt it, but also how they can resist it. Here, Jean Baudrillard's warning is that fashion's intelligent future will only matter if it escapes the hegemony of its own signs. In The Agony of Power, he distinguishes domination from hegemony. Domination is visible, while hegemony is more ambient. It becomes the networked environment we participate in, the code we work and shop through, and also the images have how we see and imagine ourselves. This is important for fashion design because it is perhaps the cultural form most skilled at turning critiques into a surface treatment or a communication. Sustainability can easily become a look, the undyed cotton, muted greens, recycled cardboard paper tags, that usual shorthand of virtue. Regeneration could also be a color palette, mushroom beige, algae green, clay pink, mineral gray, the chromatic mood of ecological seriousness, without the structural obligation of ecological repair. Biotech can also become another luxury myth, the perfect white laboratory fantasy in which life is made ever more exclusive, proprietary, and expensive. In each case, the sign of responsibility risks replacing responsibility itself. Fashion does not necessarily deny critique. More often, it absorbs it, aestheticizes it, and sends it back to the consumer as some sort of purchasable feeling. Baudrillard warned us that power no longer needs to suppress us opposition, where it can subvert opposition as a style. In the hegemonic fashion system, sustainability does not automatically interrupt consumption. It may become one of consumption's most persuasive new alibis, which would be the worst scenario. The danger then is not that fashion will ignore the future. The danger is that fashion will style the future a little too well. It will make the regenerative garment or compostable package or the repaired surface appear so seductive that we forget to ask whether the system itself has changed. A smart surface can easily speak the language of care while continuing to serve the logic of acceleration. Circular collections can perform ecological intelligence while leaving intact the old rhythm of novelty and then discard. The most dangerous surface is the one that says all the right things. This is why the question can't be, does this product look sustainable? The question must be, what does this product change? All right, so where does this leave us? The central lesson is that future of fashions needs not always be smart. They also need to be accountable, or fashion really is not changing. The answer will not come from designers alone or from consumers or technology. It will require regulation, education, investment, and cultural change. Fashion does have one advantage, though. It is very intimate. It touches us every day. A garment can reproduce the tainted logic of extraction and pollution quietly against your skin, or it can be fabricated from another logic, one of interdependence, restraint, and repair, an embodied pleasure that arrives without waste. What will fashion look like in the future? Well, it will be worn either way. The real question is whether it will be worn as another layer of planetary exhaustion or as a second skin for a more thoughtful world. My name is Dr. Mark Joseph O'Connell. I am the author of Canadian Fashion Economies from Bloomsbury, and this research is from my forthcoming monograph, Stitching a Digital Age, The Convergence of Fashion and Technology.